GDP growth remains 7.7 at the last quarter of 2013. These numbers shouldn't surprise anyone because basically the government controls these numbers when they come out. They say that it's going to be 7.8, 7.7% growth, and you know that it'll be really close to that because they are, in fact, controlling the economy. It's command control. So what's the real GDP growth? Who knows? You'll never get the straight information from the official sources. So what's inflation? What's a GDP? There is nothing here like a John Williams shadow stats. So you got to kind of sift through what the government is releasing and kind of figure it out for yourself. 50%, the amount that Bitcoin lost in value overnight in China, as earlier this month the government came out and said that financial institutions could no longer use or accept Bitcoin as payment of debt or to issue credit. So it went from 7,395 RMB in value all the way down to 3,735 RMB in value. This is one of the reasons why I don't recommend getting into Bitcoin. It's very volatile. Things like this can happen, and China is saying no to Bitcoin. More problems on the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands dispute. Japan threatens use of force. This has happened tit for tat for months now, for a couple of years, over a couple of years, and the diplomacy hasn't been really to the effort level that it should be by not only China and Japan, but the other members of the Asian community. So we go on with these daily confrontations around the waters of those island chains and other chains, and up to this point we haven't had any hot war per se, but the information war and the tit-for-tat rhetoric and water cannons and buzzing of airspace, this has been going on daily, and the mainstream media has not reported on it. I fear that someday we're going to have a front page news report and a around the world report on a military action due to some mistakes made when you have all these ships and planes so closely quartered in a small area in the South China Sea. And the cartoon of the month here, you see Uncle Sam in one half of the cartoon. I strongly condemn it, terrorism in the West. In a report on terrorism in China, I can't see anything. This is viewed as a double standard in China, as there is a lot of terrorism per se in Xinjiang and some other areas in China, in which indirectly I think that China sees the West as encouraging, or the powers that be to be an encouraging factor in destabilization. Small village in Sichuan, out in China, in the middle of China. The villagers shared a 13 million yuan bonus in cash, and you can see there, just in time for the new year, the cash stacked up, and all the villagers, all the peasants, looking at the stacks of hot money. Why? Because there's a agricultural company out there, a big one, that has been quite successful, and they're sharing the year-end bonus with the people. This is refreshing. This is like the old profit-sharing companies of the past, the auto makers and other businesses, even medium-sized businesses that have good profit sharing. You don't see it so often in the West, but here you do see it occasionally. So what will all those villagers be doing with all of that new money? Well, take a guess. They're going to be buying electronics, they're going to be buying cars, they're going to be buying the things that have been enjoyed by Westerners and now being promised to Chinese. They're going to be going after it. And the Chinese that don't have access to funds and don't have access to the things that the other Chinese have as they grow into the middle class, they're going to be mightily pissed off. And that's where social unrest comes from. There's still a great wage disparity in China, and we'll see a lot of social unrest, as you'll see in my upcoming videos, that could get to a point where there's some major destabilization of the new bank lending reaches 4-year high in China. China's new yuan bank lending reaches 8.89 trillion yuan in 2013, up 687.9 billion year on year, according to the People's Bank of China. Now, this is a little bit of a surprise because the government had always been talking about tightening down amongst higher inflation and astronomical housing prices. So this, coupled with the shadow banking system, P2P lending, loan sharks, etc., is troubling for an economy that is not growing as fast as it has in the past, and with no way out and with so much debt, both fiscally for each province and city and also personally in such a short period of time, in just a couple of years, the debt has risen here tremendously. And not a lot of people are reporting on that, but it's a major concern that this is a perfect debt bomb, a debt storm globally. China was supposed to be the one nation in the world that would help to so-called bring us out of global recession. But with this amount of debt on the books and with so much shadow banking and so much lack of truth in what's really going on, you can't really rely on Asia to pull the world out of a recession. This is a perfect storm, and every country is involved with it, inflating their currency and hiding debt until the time comes when hopefully there will be some sort of resolution with world currencies and a way to write off the debt. Debt jubilee, possible, not probable. Right there it is, number of college graduates all the way up now to 7.27 million each year. There's over 500,000 college students that study abroad that are Chinese nationals in Australia, United States, Europe, and other places. And so, with all of these new graduates, highly educated, starting salaries about 3,000 yuan to 4,000 yuan per month, what's going to happen to those jobs that were considered to be white collar? Well, if we look around the world and we look at the growing number of visas issued for Chinese students and business people and so on, we're going to see that there's increased competition in your country for those white-collar jobs that we have thought would be untouchable, because there's going to be a lot of educated Chinese that are willing to work for a fraction of what you are. Tencent, one of the popular software makers located in Shenzhen, Guangdong, China, has announced that it's going to fund its own products. It's going to have what is basically micro-lending, or actually being a creditor through kind of a shadow banking type of setup, which is very popular in China and throughout Asia. It's about to launch its own monetary fund and products in cooperation with a fund company out of Beijing. And this allows them to not only issue stock to get more capital, but also have micro-lending and things like this that will allow them to create new ventures. Reshoring, that's going to be a new term we're going to hear a lot here in 2014. Many companies reshoring from China to their home countries, including GE, a big GE plant that is reshoring from China to its appliance park in Louisville, Kentucky. This happened just in 2012, and there'll be many more that actually do that. Why? Because rising wages in China, other problems in China dealing with local governments, and some backlash in home companies for these big firms that move to China and they try to do business and try to get cheap labor. So what's going to happen? Well, these companies may be moving back to your home country, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have a job there, because like I just reported with the college graduates, they'll move the companies back to your country and then they'll give work visas to Chinese nationals. This is happening in every sector, from mining, service sector, all the way up to those white-collar jobs that you wouldn't consider it being something that would be outsourced to China in your home country. So be aware of that. and understand that this is the new normal, that these industrial parks with sweetheart deals for foreign countries to take your jobs at home are something that is always being discussed, and something that is going to affect you at home.
Power, profits, and poppies. Well, there were 2 opium wars fought by the Chinese and the British, and part of the reason, well, the actual reason was due to the extremely profitable drug trade. And when we look at the Bund today, like I showed you before, you can see these houses of business that were made by the English, the American, the Dutch, the French, and so on. And a lot of these houses of trade were established because of opium. And it expanded out into cotton and other kind of commodities to trade. But opium was the biggest cash cow. And that is a precursor, of course, to today's worldwide drug trade. It's a huge profitable business. There's so much money to be made, and that's why the trade agreements were established and the ports of Shanghai and Tianjin were opened. Hong Kong was the only port and special trade zone for so long in China. After the Second Opium War, they opened up 2 additional ports because of the trade of drugs and other type of commodities. So it's interesting, you know, legal or illegal, the drug trade is here to stay, and the black market still thrives in China. Although the illegal drug trade has gone underground, it is still very prevalent.
Huge drug crackdown in China, Guangdong province, Lufeng village, and several other villages. They found a massive amount of drugs, 182 people arrested, and over 20% of the families living in these villages were involved in the drug trade. Now, methamphetamines have been more and more popular in China, and the drug trade has gotten more and more sophisticated because there's, you know, money to be made in it. And the triads, which is one of the big gangs down in the south of China, and other gangs have always been involved in the drug trade. The Golden Triangle is down Thailand and Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. That's the Golden Triangle. That's where a lot of the drugs in Asia, and a large percentage really of the world's drugs, come up through. House prices grow for the 19th straight month. This is something I've been reporting on for several years now. Shanghai housing market extremely robust in 2013, as well as the other major cities. The housing bubble continues to inflate, and there's no relief in sight. The government has been trying to suppress housing prices, and it has, in fact, been the reverse. Their actions have caused housing prices to go up even more as restrictions and tightening on the number of houses and lending make people want to invest it even more. So, very troublesome, because when this bubble breaks, it's going to be the big daddy of them all. It's going to make the United States housing crisis look like Cracker Jacks. Macau sets new casino income record with $45 billion profit last year. Macau now the #1 gaming place in the world. And as I've reported before, Asians in general love gambling. And Macau, some of the reasons why it's so successful is because that's where a lot of money gets laundered by government officials. And they're able to do it there without a paper trail. And you can imagine how it's done with casino chips and other things and favors and so on. And it's also a way to get some money outside of China if you are lucky enough to have a visa to go abroad. China expects U.S. $41 billion raise from 300 IPOs. Well, they've actually put a hold on that now because there's some problems here with liquidity, and a lot of the IPOs are on hold as they find out what's going to happen here in the first quarter of 2014. There's a lot of concern here on what may happen here, not only in the economies of Asia, but what will happen in the West after this first quarter, because the talk of taper has got some people a little confused. But be no mistake about it, there will be no taper, at least long term.